Hi, my name is Lucretia. I asked my son if I could move just a little closer because I couldn't drive anymore. I didn't ask to move in. I didn't ask for money. I just wanted not to be alone. He said, "This isn't my problem." And that was the start. They moved me into a care facility, signed papers I never saw, sold the house I'd painted with my own hands, rewrote me in family photos, and then erased me altogether. Was I just someone to be managed? Or did they think I wouldn't notice they'd already written the ending to a story I wasn't finished living? I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the hum of the engine, the little sense of control it gave me, until the silence became a routine. Every morning felt heavier since I'd tucked the car keys into the drawer last February. The drive to the market, the trip to Sunday service, the spontaneous detour to the park, all vanished. My world had shrunk to the length of my front porch. It was a Sunday in early March. The daffodils along the sidewalk had just started to bloom, a reminder that life kept moving, whether I was part of it or not. I set the kettle on, folded the morning paper, and stared at the phone. Salvador usually had time around laundry hour, just after brunch, but before the kids' homework kicked in. I knew his rhythms better than I should have. At 2:17, I pressed his name and waited. He answered with that clipped, breathless voice. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "Just wanted to hear your voice," I said, trying not to sound like I was clinging. "Been thinking. Might be time I moved a bit closer. Not into your place, just somewhere nearby. I can't drive anymore, Sal. Groceries 20 minutes out and..." A pause. Then laughter in the background, probably the boys. Salvador cut in, voice firm, flat. "This isn't my problem, Mom." I froze. From the background, Maya's voice drifted, sharp, dismissive. "She needs care, not proximity, Sal." He didn't apologize. He didn't soften. I swallowed the lump and forced a chuckle. "Well," I said, "just thought I'd ask." He mumbled something about folding laundry. I ended the call before he could. A week later, a knock on my door startled me. Salvador stood there with a folder and that fake smile he wore when trying to sell an idea. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping in. "Brought some papers to help. Stuff for emergencies. Standard stuff." Marge wasn't with him, but I could feel her influence all over the neatly labeled tabs. "I'm doing fine," I said, but he waved me off. "This is for your peace of mind. Power of attorney, medical preferences. If something happens, we'll know what to do. No fuss." I didn't read much. I'd signed school field trip forms with more scrutiny. He pushed a pen into my hand like a closing deal. I scribbled my name twice. That evening, I left the folder on the dining table. The papers sat there like an uneaten meal, and I stared at them over reheated soup. Something felt hollow. The next morning, Cheryl came by with a box of canned goods. She needed a notary for her own documents, some estate planning stuff. That word stuck with me all day. I pulled out the folder again, this time reading slowly. Words like irrevocable, transfer, and consent jumped out like strangers in my house. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. But that night, I sat by the fireplace, an old photo of my husband propped on the mantel. He was smiling, always was in photos. "Would you have let him talk to me like that?" I whispered. The room didn't answer. The ticking clock reminded me I wasn't getting any younger. But maybe, just maybe, I was getting wiser. I didn't cry that night. I saved that for what came next. A few days after that call, Salvador pulled into my driveway with Maje in the passenger seat. They hadn't told me they were coming. He waved, a little too cheerfully, while she stayed in the car. Her eyes never left her phone. "We thought you might want to check out a place," he said, popping the trunk. I stood on the porch, arms crossed. "A place? It's nice," Mage called out, still not looking up. "Really nice." They had framed it as a tour, a chance to see what's out there. The drive to Cedarwood Haven was quiet, except for Salvador's calls. He spent most of the ride on Bluetooth, talking about contracts and closing dates. Maje filled the silence with business buzzwords: comfort-focused care, aging with dignity. The facility was pristine, manicured walkways, staff that smiled just a second too long. Everything looked staged, like a catalog. As we walked through the front doors, something in my stomach turned over. I hadn't agreed to anything, yet I was here. We sat in a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon and antiseptic. Maje spoke for me like I wasn't in the room. "She's sharp," she told the intake coordinator, "but we want to be proactive." Salvador nodded, but barely looked up from his phone. They pushed papers my way: medical forms, financial disclosures, resident profiles. "It's just to get you started," Maid said. "They'll hold the room until we decide." I signed, distracted by the fake fireplace flickering on a screen behind the receptionist. The pen felt heavier than it should have. A nurse led me down a hallway, so polished it gleamed. She opened the door to a room that smelled like someone else's past. Beige walls, a hospital bed, a single chair by the window. "Welcome home," she said. I blinked. "I thought this was a tour." She smiled politely. "Paperwork says permanent." My legs felt weak. The carpet blurred. Back at the nurse's station, I caught Maj talking on the phone, her tone casual, smooth. He said the bonus would post once the transfer clears. She looked up startled when she noticed me. "Just confirming logistics," she said quickly. I didn't ask what bonus. I didn't ask what transfer. That night, I sat on the edge of the twin bed, suitcase half unpacked. No family photos, no letters. Just 2 changes of clothes and a generic toiletry kit. I realized they hadn't forwarded my mail. I walked to the window. Outside, someone's grandson was planting tulips. Not mine. I was too far from Waco, too far from everything. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The vent above my bed clicked on. Cool air, cold realization. "I should have seen this coming," I whispered. It was laundry day, the kind that made time stretch like warm taffy. I was folding towels near the window, letting the smell of starch distract me, when the phone rang. Cheryl's name flashed on the screen. My neighbor from Waco, the one who used to bring over tomatoes from her garden. "Lou?" she said, voice low and a little unsure. "I didn't want to call if it wasn't real, but is it true? You're selling the house?" I blinked. "Selling?" "Yeah, it's listed on Homes West. Description says you've transitioned to luxury elder care. Real estate photos, open house this weekend." I gripped the phone tighter. "Open house?" I didn't want to believe it without asking, Cheryl continued. "But it's got your lilac bush in the photo. Even mentions the wraparound porch. Says, seller has voluntarily relocated to a full-service senior community in Austin." The words scraped across my chest like broken glass. After we hung up, I stared out the window. A week ago, during my afternoon nap, someone had knocked at my old house. I remembered it now. They'd asked if the tenant was home. I thought they were confused. Now I knew better. They weren't lost. They were buyers. I sat back down, my hands still damp from folding. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the lie, or that they didn't even think it was worth telling me. Salvador hadn't called. Maje hadn't texted. But the world already knew I was gone. Later that day, I asked the nurse for quiet time in my room. I sat on the bed and tried to count how many times I'd walked through the rooms of that house. The hallway where I'd paced during Salvador's fever when he was 9. The creaky floorboard by the stove where I always stood for morning coffee. The back fence I repainted by hand every spring just to keep it clean. And they'd sold it. They sold my memory, I whispered, before I had a chance to say goodbye. I didn't cry. I just sat, numb. That numbness hardened into something sharper by dinner. I didn't call him. I already knew what he'd say. Something about logistics, something about how it was time. Maj would chime in with how I deserved stability. I wasn't ready to fight, but I needed to know what was real. That evening, I walked quietly to the facility's library. The computer lab was always half empty after 7. I logged in and typed slowly. Texas property transfer laws, notification to owner. I clicked through legal articles, cross-checked form numbers, scrolled through examples. Then I found something, a clause, small, buried, but there, saying any transfer on a joint asset required written consent unless power of attorney was granted after physical relocation. I printed the page and slipped it into a folder, my folder, not his. I stood there for a while, the printer humming like it knew something I didn't yet. I wasn't ready to fight, but I was finally ready to know what had really happened. The newsletter came through email, like it always did on the first Monday of the month. I didn't usually open them. Most of it was fluff, lawn care tips, recipe swaps, quotes from residents about the joy of transition. But that morning, something pulled me toward it. The subject line, Entrepreneur, Entrecom on airing families who care. The image at the top was unmistakable. Salvador, grinning, standing beside the head nurse. The caption below read, recognizing Salvador La Piedra for his heartfelt decision to place his mother, Lucrecia, in a supportive, thriving community. My stomach dropped. I kept scrolling. The article described him as a pillar of compassion and highlighted how some families make the hard but loving choice to step aside for professional care. My name wasn't mentioned again. It didn't need to be. The photo said it all. Him, arms folded confidently, no trace of the woman he supposedly helped. At the bottom of the newsletter was a link. Read more about the La Piedra family's journey. I clicked. It led to a polished blog called Living Forward, apparently managed by Maj. There, I found a cropped image of myself, smiling weakly, during the facility tour weeks ago. They'd used it without permission, slipped it beneath a paragraph that read, Transitioning Mom, Why Care Starts with Courage. There was no mention of my name, no reference to my job, my life, or the fact I hadn't even known I'd be staying here permanently that day. Just one smile, mine, frozen, stolen, repurposed for their narrative. I sat for a moment, then clicked away. Later that week, I logged onto Mage's public profile, more out of habit than anything else. There was a new post, birthday photos from their younger son's party, streamers, balloons, faces I knew and ones I didn't. I scrolled down to the group picture at the end. Something about it felt off. Then I realized an old photo had been reused, one I remembered posing for 2 years ago. But now, my place in the photo was empty, not blurred, not covered, removed, like I'd never been there. I stared at the screen. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw the tablet across the room. That night, I walked down the corridor of cedarwood, stopping at the big glass window near the east wing. The fluorescent light cast back my reflection, faint, aged, barely distinct against the outside glare. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, "They didn't just forget me. They replaced me." The betrayal wasn't just in action anymore. It lived in narrative, in absence. I didn't call. I didn't scream. I didn't send an email asking why my image had been erased. I knew what the answers would sound like. Instead, I opened my notebook. I wrote one sentence. If I vanish this easily, maybe it's time I choose how. I circled the words document access 3 times. Because if they were going to tell a story, I needed to make sure it wasn't the only version that existed. I didn't just lose a home. I lost the right to be remembered. It started with a routine checkup, one of those standard monthly assessments they insisted on. I walked to the nurse's station just after breakfast. The halls smelled faintly of oatmeal and antiseptic, and the light pouring in from the east windows felt too bright for what followed. Shannon, the nurse on duty, greeted me with her usual perky tone. "How's the blood pressure, Miss Donaghy?" "Probably rising," I said, managing a half smile. She chuckled and opened a chart on the screen behind her desk. "Well, let's keep it down. Oh, and just to confirm, you're still under the DNR, right?" I blinked. "The what?" "Do not resuscitate," she said, like she was talking about dessert choices. "You opted for it last month. Just need to make sure it's still accurate." I didn't speak. My mouth opened, then closed. I hadn't signed that. I would have remembered. Shannon turned the screen toward me. There it was. My name, a checkbox, and a digital signature. Not mine. Salvador's. "You gave him medical proxy," she said. "It came with the intake packet." I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I was afraid to speak. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling slightly. If they could decide whether I lived or died without asking me, what else had I lost? I picked up the phone and called my bank. I needed to check a recurring charge for the storage unit where I kept a few things. Old journals, my wedding china. The woman on the line asked for verification, then hesitated. "I'm sorry, Ms. Donaghy. Your name was removed as primary account holder last month. It now lists Salvador La Piedra as sole controller." My pulse roared in my ears. "You're telling me I don't have access to my own savings?" "You're listed as dependent," she said. "Any account changes would need his approval." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't cry. That feeling had dried up somewhere between the newsletter and the fake birthday photo. I walked to the mirror. My reflection looked paler than usual, older, but something about my eyes caught me. I'd seen that look before, on myself, years ago, when I stood in a courtroom during my divorce hearing, a quiet kind of fury. I pulled my notebook from the drawer and wrote, in big block letters, "I disappear." Underneath, I wrote, "Not yet." Then I circled both phrases until the pen bled through the page. In the drawer beside my bed, I found an envelope Salvador had mailed me 2 months earlier. I'd kept it. Don't ask me why. Maybe some part of me knew I'd need it. I turned it over, staring at his return address. There it was, his handwriting, neat, controlled. Same address he used for tax filings, which meant anything routed through there could be tracked, a breadcrumb trail if I needed one. I looked over at the window, the early evening sun casting long stripes across the room. I didn't have much, but I still had my signature. My name. I began to write. Not a letter, not a plea, a plan. The dining room was unusually quiet for a Thursday. Most residents had wandered off for card games or physical therapy sessions, leaving a stillness I didn't mind. I was helping Deborah Jackson steady her tray when she nodded toward the corner booth. "Mind sitting with me a minute?" she asked. Deborah was sharp, despite the cloudiness in her left eye. We shared that unspoken connection that women over 60 seem to recognize instantly. Survivors of years, of men, of decisions made without us. Her voice carried weight, not volume. I slid into the booth across from her. She sipped her decaf slowly before speaking. "You know, I used to be an estate attorney," she said, matter of fact. I raised an eyebrow. "You?" "Retired 10 years ago, but I still remember how people disappear. On paper, I mean." I hesitated. Then I leaned closer. "What if someone signed for you?" Her gaze sharpened. "That happens more than you think." We didn't say Salvador's name. We didn't need to. She told me about forged proxies, coerced directives, people buried in legal noise before their heartbeats stopped. She said most folks never notice until it's too late. "You need someone outside this building," she added. "Neutral, protective. Do you know someone?" She nodded. "Melissa Moore. Quiet but lethal. Doesn't blink around family politics." 2 days later, with a signed release and a permitted outing, I left Cedarwood for the first time in weeks. The air outside smelled like spring and diesel. The coffee shop sat 2 blocks down, tucked between a dry cleaner and a florist. Melissa waited inside, dressed in denim and calm. We didn't shake hands. She just motioned for me to sit and opened a leather folder. I handed her the file, copies of the DNR, financial transfers, and Salvador's signature. She read in silence, flipping with clean precision. "We can work with this," she finally said. "The timing's delicate, but we've got leverage." She outlined the plan in short, clipped sentences. Challenge the DNR on grounds of absence of consent. Issue a hold on all financial movement linked to power of attorney. And file an intent to dispute the home sale based on lack of notification. I wrote everything in my notebook. My pen didn't shake. My letters didn't slant. Melissa slid me a packet with her card. "I'll handle the filings," she said. "You'll need to confirm a few things, but we'll protect your standing." The coffee cooled in my cup, untouched, but something inside me had warmed. Back at Cedarwood, I walked the halls differently. I didn't avoid faces. I met eyes. Even the nurse who once called me sweetheart now just nodded. In my room, I took out the journal I hadn't opened since the bank call. I flipped past old entries, pages filled with doubt, fear, names scribbled over in anger. I turned to a clean sheet. I wrote, "I am not asking anymore. I am acting." Then under it, I drew a line, thick, bold, uneven in places, but firm. I stared at that line for a long time, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. If they thought I'd fade into this beige room, they were wrong. I hadn't planned to go through the staff mail tray that morning. I only stopped by to return a crossword booklet I borrowed from the recreation director. But there it was, an envelope with my name, scrawled in blue crayon, wedged between junk flyers and folded newsletters. The handwriting was unmistakably a child's. I peeled the flap open carefully, like it might vanish if I moved too fast. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded twice. 2 stick figures stood smiling, arms stretching to meet. Above one read, "Me." Above the other, "Grandma." And at the bottom, written in shaky, earnest loops, "Mom says you're mad. I miss you." My chest tightened. I sat down in the corner of the mailroom, paper resting on my lap like something sacred. The drawing didn't break me, but it carved deep. They could lie about who I was, erase me from photos, strip me from bank accounts, but a child still remembered. I folded the paper into thirds and tucked it into the back of my journal, right beside the copy of the DNR Melissa had annotated. Later that afternoon, I called Melissa from the privacy nook in the library. She picked up on the second ring. "Is it possible," I asked, "to file something under another name?" There was a pause. Then, "Unusual. But yes, with the right power of attorney conditions and shell structure, we can make it work." I explained what I wanted. Something clean, separate, traceable, only if you knew what to look for. I didn't want them intercepting a thing, not until I was ready. "We'll use a trust name," she said. "Set up an account under that entity. You'll be the grantor, and I'll act as counsel. All court communications go through me." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I want the name to be mine, but not the name they gave me." That night, the packet arrived in a manila envelope marked personal. I opened it slowly. Melissa had prepared everything: the trust, the forms, even the alias. I signed Lucretia Finch, using my mother's maiden name and the street I grew up on, Finchwood Lane. As the pen met paper, I felt no tremor, no doubt, just the weight of intention. When I sealed the envelope, I didn't feel afraid. I felt exact. Just before midnight, I walked to the facility's outgoing mail tray. The hall was quiet. I slipped the envelope into the slot, careful and deliberate. My hand lingered for a moment. "This isn't revenge," I whispered. "This is resurrection." Back in my room, I peeled a strip of tape from the drawer and fixed the crayon drawing to the back of my door. Every time I'd leave that room now, I'd see it. Not the smile they stole for PR, not the birthday photo they edited, but a real memory, one they couldn't rewrite. I didn't need them to love me. I just needed them to know I was never gone. Melissa placed the camera in front of me, her fingers steady, her expression unreadable. She didn't ask if I was sure. She knew better. I sat in the chair, back straight, hands folded, and waited for her signal. When the red light blinked on, I looked straight ahead and let my voice settle into the silence. "If you're watching this," I said, "then you already know what you did." I paused, not for effect, but because the weight of truth deserved space. "You took everything you thought mattered, the house, the money, the story, but what you never got was me. I am not your burden. I am your reminder." I signed the final page of the will. One stroke, one name, mine. No more proxies, no more erasures. That afternoon, Melissa filed the documents. The trust under Lucretia Finch now held all rights to the estate. Salvador and Maje received the couriered letter the next morning. No property, no bank access, no inheritance, just a single line, printed on thick cream paper. "Love without respect is not love at all." Melissa called me that evening. "It's done." I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I sat in my room and stared at the shoebox on the top shelf of the closet. I hadn't opened it in years. It smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. Inside were birthday cards from Salvador's childhood, Polaroids of summers gone, and at the bottom, a folded envelope addressed in my husband's handwriting. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the corners. "If they ever forget what you gave up for them," he'd written, "give them something to remember you by. Never beg to be seen, Lou. Build your name where they can't touch it." I read it 3 times. Then I pinned it to the wall beside the crayon drawing from my grandson. 2 truths side by side, one from the past, one from the future. The next morning, I woke early. The air felt different, charged, like something had shifted in the foundation. Cedarwood no longer felt like a prison. It felt like headquarters, a place to launch from, not to wither in. I brewed coffee, pulled on my sweater, and walked the halls. The staff nodded, a little slower this time. One aide gave me a quiet smile, not pity, not fear, but something closer to regard. At breakfast, I sat by the window. I didn't need company, but I didn't dread being alone. I had my name. And, for the first time in months, that was enough. A week later, Melissa published an article, anonymous but sharp. It spoke of power of attorney misuse, of quiet erasures in elder care, of stories silenced before they were even written. It spread. People talked. A few staff whispered when I passed. One resident left a sticky note on my door. Thank you for saying what I didn't know how. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I walked straighter. That was enough. They tried to take everything, but I left them with the truth, and that will follow them longer than any fortune. The silence was different now, not the suffocating kind that had once made me feel like a ghost, but a peaceful quiet. The kind that follows after you've said everything that needed to be said. I sat with my tea, cooling beside me, the sun rising gently through the blinds. The legal fight was over. The filings, the letters, the firm voice I used in that recorded message, they were all behind me now. Salvador hadn't responded. Not a call. Not even a snide email. And somehow, that said more than any excuse he might have given. Maybe he didn't know how to explain what he'd done. Or maybe deep down, he knew that I'd finally seen him clearly. Either way, I was done waiting for noise from a door I no longer knocked on. 2 mornings ago, I received an envelope. I recognized the return address immediately, his house. My letter, unopened. Not even a crease in the seal. I held it for a long time before sliding it into the back of my journal, right behind Melissa's notes and the printouts I'd marked in red ink. It wasn't rage I felt, just confirmation. Sometimes unanswered is still closure. Later that week, one of the younger aides approached me in the hallway. She was always polite, always quick with a refill or a blanket. But that day, she paused. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, she said, voice low. It got us all talking about guardianship, about what we overlook. I didn't know what was happening, but now I do. I smiled, but I didn't respond. It wasn't mine to claim. If it helped someone else find their voice, then it was worth it. The victory didn't need to be loud. Then, another envelope came. This one had shaky block letters and 3 stamps jammed into the top right corner. Inside, a drawing. 2 stick figures again, one with curly hair, one with a blue scarf. Below it, Grandma, can I visit? I pressed the paper flat and slid it under my glass coaster on the nightstand. It stayed there, right beside my cup of pens, and the ceramic bird Salvador had made in 5th grade. I didn't write back, not yet, but I smiled. Not yet, I whispered, but maybe someday. The sun was higher now. I pulled on my cardigan and walked outside to the small garden behind the facility. My feet knew the path without thinking. Each crack in the concrete, each wild sprig of rosemary near the edge. No one joined me. I liked it that way. For the first time, being alone didn't feel like being left behind. I had plans, small ones. I'd signed up to lead a writing group for the residents who didn't know how to put their lives into words. I wanted to visit the hill country again, see the bluebonnets bloom, maybe even take the train down to San Antonio. No itinerary, just a window seat and time. They took what they thought mattered. They rewrote me in photos, dictated how I'd end my life, decided what I was worth in numbers and deeds. But they didn't get everything. I kept my voice. I kept my story. And the rest is mine to keep. Sometimes the loudest victories come without applause. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream. I wrote. I stood still. I reclaimed what was mine by refusing to vanish. If my story speaks to you, let it be a reminder. Dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you decide not to give away. Maybe you've been erased in your own life by silence, by control, by people who thought they knew better. I want you to know you're still here, you matter, and it's never too late to draw your own line. What would you do if someone tried to rewrite your story? Let me know in the comments. Type 1 if this video moved you, or share where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, I'd still love to hear why. Was it the topic? The tone? Your voice matters too. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next one. We've got more true, human stories just like this. Stories that remind us that healing is possible and that no one is ever too old to fight back with grace.